My name is Christopher Buchinsky, and today I am presenting my senior research project on the impact of physical activity involvement on fitness estimates. Before I begin, I'd like to say a few things about me. As you just heard, my name is Christopher Buchinsky. I'm currently a senior at George Washington High School, and once I graduate, I intend to go to Danville Community College in order to obtain an associate's degree in liberal arts. To start off, I'd like to begin with why I chose my topic. My first reason for choosing my topic was the many sports teams and physical activities present at George Washington. At George Washington, you can find many different types of sports teams, ranging from soccer, football, tennis, baseball, and even golf. This is what sparked my idea for testing physical exercise. My second reason for choosing my topic was considering the potential benefit of my study. When brainstorming what type of study I wished to conduct, I found that there was very little literature covering impact of amount of regular exercise days. Through conducting the study, I could provide data on a section of the field that has not been covered in depth. My final reason for choosing my topic was my personal interest in the topic. When I first started the study, I was not the most athletic or fit student by a long shot. However, my lack of exercise led me to wonder how much of an impact exercise truly had on athletic performance. To begin my literature review, I will first discuss the health-related aspects of physical fitness. There are two main benefits associated with physical fitness, those being reduced risk for chronic diseases and reduced mortality rates. In studies such as Warburton et al., it was concluded that individuals who were physically fit had a reduced diagnosis rate for chronic diseases such as diabetes, cancer, and osteoporosis, ranging from 20% to 60% less likely to have compared to individuals who were not physically fit. In addition to reduced risk for chronic diseases, Warburton et al. Also identifies that with each increase in fitness level, known as a MET score, there is an estimated 20% mortality benefit. A MET, otherwise known as a metabolic equivalent, is the level of energy expended per minute exercising. Quietly sitting is considered the baseline for MET scores, coming out at 1 MET. And moderate level activities are 3 to 6 METs and include brisk walking and lawn mowing. Vigorous level activities are greater than 6 METs and include running, biking, and most sports. The current recommended amount of MET minutes is 150 to 300 a week of moderate activities, or 75 to 150 a week of vigorous activities. While there are many health benefits to consider, outside the two major benefits I just discussed, many researchers are struggling with the problem of maintaining exercise in children, adolescents, and young adults. For instance, the study Troiano et al. Found that in recent years, only 42% of children, 6 to 8% of adolescents, and 5% of young adults met the recommended level of exercise. In a study conducted by Silva et al., several conclusions were drawn to answer why recommended exercise levels were not being reached. Among those conclusions, the study reported the top 3 main reasons associated with physical inactivity, those being a lack of time and motivation, a lack of support, and a lack of accessible places. The research also found that although screen time was not a significant barrier to physical activity, it is associated with causing a lack of time to exercise. It was shown through previous studies that more screen time directly correlated to less time for other activities, including physical activities, as well as being a main factor for adolescent physical inactivity. The final segment from my literature review will comprise what counteractive measures are being tested and used in order to combat the negative trends. One such idea is to develop fitness in children. In studies such as Hollis et al. And Whedon et al., it is being studied whether introducing children into exercises and trying to build a habit of maintaining fitness from an early age will persist into adulthood. In addition to promoting exercise, Batista et al. Explores the idea of sports or activities predicting whether an individual will continue exercising in the future. When combined with proposals like Nestorchuk et al. To use augmented reality or virtual reality with exercises in order to promote and engage children with fitness, there are many different suggestions for how to improve fitness rates. With the gap of research on impact of regular exercise days, I developed my research question, which is, how does the amount of physical activity done affect exercise performance in high school students? With my research question in mind, I came up with 2 hypotheses. My research hypothesis was, if a student participates in an exercise program, then they will perform better than a student who does not. The negation of my hypothesis, my null hypothesis, states if a student participates in an exercise program, then there will be no difference compared to a student who does not. There are many different variables for my study, and I've categorized them into 4 groups. My independent variable for my study was whether a student participated in an exercise program. My dependent variable was how many exercises the student could perform. For my control variable, I had a group of students who reported no regular exercise. And finally, for my constants, I had the warm-ups done, the types of exercises, the pacing of exercises, and the duration of the exercise period. To begin my methodology, I first had to obtain consent from the administration at Piedmont Governor School and George Washington High School. Permission to photograph students and informing participants of potential risk was also done before conducting my test. After I had enough consent forms, I then asked participants to come in on a day to test. The 2 testing sites I had were the orchestra room at George Washington and the hallway outside Miss Long's room at Governor School. After I had gathered my participants, I had everyone fill out a questionnaire. I designed the questionnaire and had the students fill out what exercise program they participated in and the average amount of days they exercised a week for a majority of the semester. After filling out the questionnaire, I had the participants through some stretches. The purpose of the stretches was to warm up muscles before exercising and to reduce the chance of straining or injuring a muscle. After stretching, the participants were led through 4 different exercises in order to test the different aspects of health. They performed push-ups, curl-ups, trunk lifts, and shoulder stretches. The push-ups were done to test upper body strength and flexibility, the curl-ups to test abdominal strength and endurance, trunk lifts to test trunk extensor strength and flexibility, and finally, a shoulder stretch to test flexibility of the joints. Each category tested is responsible for a part of your health, ranging from posture to lower back pain to risk of injury during daily operations. Since I was unable to find a Virginia Department of Education procedure, I used the California Department of Education procedure for physical fitness testing. After each exercise was done, participants were given 2 to 3 minutes to breathe and rest before continuing with the next exercise. After all exercises were complete, students were allowed a 5-minute break before returning to class. After all testing was done, the raw data was compiled into an Excel spreadsheet, and statistical analysis was conducted. For my statistical analysis, I conducted a one-way ANOVA in order to test the significance between my data. My data was categorized into one of 3 groups: no regular exercise participation, participation for 1 to 3 days, and participation for 4 to 7 days. Going on, I will refer to the groups as the control group, the less exercise group, and the more exercise group, respectively. An ANOVA was performed for each of the exercises, with the exception of the shoulder stretch, which most participants were able to complete, barring those who had a health reason for being unable to. All of my ANOVAs showed that at my level of significance, there was enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis, with a p-value of 0.047 for push-ups, a p-value of 0.008 for curl-ups, and a p-value of less than 0.001 for the trunk lifts. In order to help showcase the trends in the data, I added this chart to help visualize the differences. As you can see from the chart, the biggest jump in average exercise done was from the control group to the 1 to 3 days of participation, which on this graph is the green bars and the blue bars. You can see that for most of the exercises, the amount of exercises performed on average nearly doubled between the 2 groups. However, you can also see that between the blue and the red bars, which is the less exercise and the more exercise groups, that there was very minimal change in the amount of average exercises. Up next, I had to interpret my results. I concluded my data stating that at the 0.05 level of significance, there is sufficient evidence to suggest that students who exercise more often can perform better in curl-ups, push-ups, and trunk lifts than students who do not regularly exercise. There were 3 main points that I synthesized from the results. The first point was the significant difference between the control group and the fewer exercise group. Using the data and the graph, I tested and found that there was a significant difference between the 2 groups in every exercise. As stated on the previous slide, I also found that there was very little, and as was found out, no significant difference between the less exercise and more exercise group. However, I did notice that from my more exercise group, that there was more varied data, going plus or minus 1.5 standard deviations from the mean. This could point to the fact that some people who reported 4 to 7 days may not have had the same level of exercise as others in that category. I drew 2 main implications from my study. The first was that exercise plans should be rescheduled to follow a 2 to 3 day plan. My data showed that those who had more days of exercise did not typically perform greater than those who had fewer days, leading to the idea that the people who exercised less often had more intense exercises. Our results can be used to help people who stress out about exercising for a majority of the week to see gains relax and work out a different schedule. The second implication I drew coincides with the first, and that is implementing routines to promote health in people who do not regularly exercise. Compared to control group, it could be assumed that adding in 2 to 3 days of exercise for someone who does not exercise at all would be enough to show significant change in health and reduce overall risk factors for individuals. This can be used in daily life to help promote healthier living, as anyone can create a schedule where 3 days a week they have 1 to 2 hours allotted for exercising. For my study, I had 2 major limitations: sample and the sampling method. Since my study only had 30 participants, I did not have enough participants to sort by days of exercise in addition to gender. This means that some of the data may have been misinterpreted, since previous studies have shown that gender has an impact on physical activity. Furthermore, participants from my study were gathered through convenience. There's a chance for bias in the results as a result of less fit individuals not being taken compared to those who are, as students at Governor School are more often not involved in some form of extracurricular physical activity. My research does reveal some implications for future studies. My data exposes a need for additional research to confirm whether my data is correct, and assuming there is no significant difference between greater amount of exercise days. If future research confirms there is no significant difference, then workout routines can change to reflect the data. Additionally, more research can be done focusing on promoting and maintaining fewer but more intense workouts. Since fewer more intense exercise days showed a higher improvement compared to more often but less intense days, a gap is created in finding a method of introducing children and adolescents to the fewer exercise days, as well as having the child and adolescent continue on exercising into adulthood. And finally, more studies can be done focusing on the gender. Since, as stated, gender has been seen to have an impact from previous studies, future studies could have a greater sample and more accurately see if there's a specific difference between the genders. With my research project done, I'd like to give a few takeaways that I personally discovered from conducting this study. The first takeaway I got from the study was that being lazy is really, and I mean really, bad for your health. In tandem with number 1, number 2, I found that exercise is more important than I previously thought. I originally assumed it was okay to be lethargic and a tad bit lazy, but quickly found through my articles that not exercising puts a huge risk factor on your head for cardiovascular diseases and all-cause mortality. This has led me to my third takeaway, and that was to make it a personal goal to start an exercise schedule and to stay fit. Because at the end of the day, I only have one body, and once it's gone, there is no second chances. And also, if I were to die right now, I wouldn't be able to see any of my cats anymore, and all 5 of which can be seen on the screen right now. With that, I'd like to end with a thank you to certain individuals. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Dr. Bocock and Kimberly Agner for permission to test at both Piedmont Government School and George Washington High School, respectively. Second, I'd like to thank my PGS MST teachers, Ms. Fain for helping with my methodology, Ms. Gravitt for helping with my statistical analysis, and finally, Ms. Long for providing assistance throughout the SRP process. Third, I'd like to thank Ms. Griffin and Ms. Long again for allowing me to test participants in their rooms. And finally, I'd like to thank my participants for making my study possible and for providing me with the insight I now have. At this time, I'll now be taking any questions. Yes, Mr. Shaw?
Did your questionnaire address how much each student exercised per day, or just how many days?
So Mr. Shaw is asking me if my questionnaire figured out how much they were exercising each day or just how many days they exercised. And my questionnaire simply asked how many days on average a week that they would regularly exercise. So it wasn't testing if they would exercise for 1 or 2 hours a day or 30 minutes, but more so how many days a week that they said they would regularly exercise.
Did you have any outliers, particularly those who scored very high?
So Dr. Jones is asking, from my data, did I have any outliers? And I'll quickly go back to the graph because while you can't see it, it does help to point out that, as I was saying, from the 4 to 7 days of exercise, some people reached the limit, and when I was testing, I stopped cut off at 50 exercises. So while some students were able to reach that, others were unable to get past 10 or 15 exercises. So there were cases where some students in that group could reach the max and some far from it. So you could say that from that, some of the data were low outliers and some were high outliers in the rest. Yes, Ms. Propsy?
How did you determine the performance? Was it that they completed the exercise like textbook, or I guess I'm confused on what you actually measured?
So you're asking what I measured to test performance of it. So when I conducted the study, what I was testing to see was whether if a student reported having more days, that they could perform more exercises. So what I was testing was to see how many of each exercise they could perform. So for curl-ups, how many could a student who does 1 day of exercise do compared to a student who does 6? Same for push-ups and trunk lifts. So
you were there for all of them? Like,
yes.
So would you say like they had to go like all the way up over the bar if it was like a pull-up, or like how do you say it was completed?
So as I was saying previously, you're asking how did I judge whether an exercise was completed or not.
Mm-hmm.
The California Department of Education procedure came with a list of exercises that they test, and of those I can only choose a few because while pull-ups can also be used in place of push-ups, I didn't have a portable pull-up bar that could pull around. So in it, it stated how each exercise was to be done. So for instance, push-ups, your arms are supposed to go all the way up and then back down to a 90-degree angle. So I would use that to determine how many of each exercise the students were able to perform.
So did you have to tell them that wasn't good enough? Or the reason I'm asking is if they didn't perform them well enough to be counted, could that have added to their fatigue?
So you're saying did I inform students before of whether they were good or not or how they were doing it. So before each exercise, I would tell the students how to do it, like what they need to do. And then to time it, I would have a fitness gram timer that had a standardized amount of time between each that I would use to time them. So I would tell them how to do it and then have them timed with the fitness gram timer.
Oh, okay.
So what was the length of the study? I don't know if you missed that. Was it over a course of a week or a semester? Or?
So you're asking what was the sort of timeline for the study. So when I initially conducted my study, the exercises were done in November and December. So as I was saying, many of the students I had self-report how much they exercised over the average of the semester. So in November and December is when I would take the students and I would bring them in to exercise. So typically around that last week of November into the first week of December. Does that answer that question, just to make sure? All right.